thousands of years ago, ancient yogis believed that they had found the answer to what is the highest form of happiness. That's quite a lofty goal, right? The highest form of happiness. Well, ancient yogis believed that the highest form of happiness is Santosha. And Santosha roughly means contentment. So you might ask yourself, okay, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be content? And why is that the highest form of happiness? Why did ancient yogis believe it was the highest form of happiness? And to understand that, you have to appreciate that ancient yogis, especially in classical yoga, which is where this teaching comes from the Yoga Sutras, it was all about withdrawing from the external world to your internal world. So ancient yogis back in the day weren't interested in engaging with the external world. In classical yoga, they were about withdrawing from the world and withdrawing from your body, withdrawing from mind, body, and the external world. And so it's important to recognize that context when we talk about the concept of Santosha, and you might hear it in yoga classes, you might hear it quoted. It's probably one of the most popular quoted sort of concepts from the Yoga Sutras. But what's important to recognize, and what's interesting to recognize, is that the yogis that were practicing at that time, and when the Yoga Sutras were written, they were living very different lives to what we live now, and had very different goals. And they wasn't interested in anything external, wasn't interested in having relationships, having accomplishments, doing nice things, going on nice holidays. It was a very different, so the way they viewed happiness was very different. And so the reason they viewed contentment as the highest form of happiness is because contentment, Santosha, doesn't rely on anything external. It's an internal state of being that is about being content with what is in the present moment. So whatever is happening here and now, present moment, you come into a state of contentment with what is. And that was considered the highest form of happiness because it doesn't exist in the future and doesn't exist in the past. It exists here and now, and it is purely internal. It's not relying on places, people, accomplishments. It's an internal state of being. And so it's an interesting concept, and it's interesting to think about the historical context of how ancient yogis practiced and what their mindset and lifestyle was at the time that the Yoga Sutras were written, compared to how we live our lives now and what we consider, what we view as happiness, which I think most people would associate with kind of peak experiences or external things like going to magical places, being around people that really light you up and fill you with joy, having accomplishments in life. They are things that we as a society now typically view as what makes us happy or what happy is. And I mean, that will be dictated as well by what the media tells us happiness looks like. And that's a whole other subject, I guess. So it's important to recognise that context when we are looking at the Yoga Sutras, when we're considering these concepts in yoga and from these ancient yogic texts, to appreciate that how we interpret happiness now, how we might apply Santosha now, is probably quite different to how yogis were applying and practicing Santosha back in the day. Something that I find quite helpful in applying Santosha and practicing Santosha in my sort of modern day life is having peak experiences, having amazing holidays, being around people that you love and that light you up. But once that peak experience ends, so once you come back down from that peak experience, you can find contentment. You can, coming back to sort of a baseline way of being, and being okay and content with what is, whatever is being experienced moment to moment. That is a way of experiencing Santosha. So, riding through the peaks and the lows, the highs and the lows of life, and the highs being what you might consider happiness or happy times. And when you notice whatever external thing is driving that, so maybe going on holiday, maybe dating someone new that you find really fun and exciting, or getting a promotion at work, or doing a really good job at a presentation at work. Once that's over, coming back to your baseline way of being, finding contentment with that, with your baseline way of being, that's one good way of practicing and interpreting Santosha maybe in our modern day life. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on how we can apply Santosha, contentment, to our modern day lives, how you might view happiness and what you consider the highest form of happiness, because it is, after all, it's a subjective thing. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments below.